this first part, I wanted just to, I don't know really, just to give some feedback about. I've been with the company almost 3 years now, and I want to give some feedback about things that I've seen as a cross section of both open source and commercial product users. We can talk about the differences between them, but that's not the, this is really just to talk about the core of the product, some of the things that you're doing, some of the challenges, and the way that this might, well, maybe we can work. I've also got something, I guess, to give to the community a little bit later on, in case it's interesting. This is also a platform to say, hey, I built something, I'd like to share it. Here's the repo, and this is so. I've got a few things I want to show you here anyway. So I'm going to be jumping around from presentation to showing you some things live and things like that as well. So just 20 minutes. So let's see how it goes. Any questions? Ask in the chat, or just unmute yourself. We're just a bunch of people sitting around a big table talking about Rundeck. So I thought I'd talk about these learnings. Things that I'm seeing really work well with customers, right? And I think probably the first thing, and it might seem fundamental, and you might all be using this. So again, let's not, I definitely don't want to insult, but I'm quite often asked about, well, what are the customers doing with Rundeck? Using, source control management everywhere within Rundeck. The great thing about Rundeck is, of course, you can use the Git plugins to push the jobs to repos. Okay, so you can store them, you can stage different deployments, and you can keep those jobs up to date as a single source of truth within SCM. Now, one of the things that I can show you how I've seen it work really well is actually this concept of having environments where you have a developer will build in a particular environment, push to Git, and then from Git, you're going to have your code reviews and everything else, and then at that point, Git you can pull directly from production. So no hands-on production. Maybe you can go into production and read logs, but production is kind of, nothing goes into production that hasn't been ratified or whatever. So I think that's the first thing that I'm seeing. Successful organizations that use Rundeck store their code in repositories like Git, for example. There's also a Git plugin. Think you can probably use this. I mean, again, if people are using this for running some of the scripts. So what I see is, you can use inline, of course. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, ultimately, that inline script would be stored as code. But if you maybe have a scenario where you're pulling maybe Ansible playbooks, you want to pull them back to a central location, you pull them back, and you can pull back with things like job IDs or execution IDs to give you a temporary ID, run the code, and then delete it securely after. So that's the second kind of scenario that I see around SCM. And then the third one is to actually use it to things like the HTTP step to trigger actions like GitHub Actions, for example. So can be used for sort of remediation steps, can be used in self-service scenarios or for rollbacks. So I think that's my first tip. And if you're not using it, look into this scenario where you have a development production type environment. Each of them, one is pushing to Git, one is pulling from Git. And again, we have scripts. I have scripts that automatically update Git every time a new something new lands in there, and it's added to a specific branch. If you have any comments, just drop them in the.
I just asked in chat if people would use the Git plugin, yes or no. I'm quite keen to understand. So please, could you say thumbs up or not? Or
one other thing I'll mention, just as you're doing that, is that there is a Git plugin that you can download, and it'll grab from a repo and stuff like that. But you can also use other modules, there's an Ansible module specifically for Git, which I've used a few times. If I've not wanted to have an external plugin, or I'm using cloud, for example. But anyway, that was my first tip. Moving on, and again, because I want to be fairly swift on this, I don't want to labour this too much. Would be, I see customers or users working with Rundeck for maybe not always the standard jobs that you think. So, you know, if Martin and I were to talk about, hey, what have we seen over our, you know, hundreds of customers, hundreds of users that we've worked with? Well, mostly it's around self-service, right? You know, there is this aspect of event-driven automation, but I think mostly we see, you know, Rundeck initially used for either self-service or scheduled operations. Okay, but usually that's an IT task. One of the things that I do want to mention, just because it's not necessarily in order of importance, but maybe just gets you kind of brain thinking. Well, what about using Rundeck for non-IT tasks? So an interesting one that I had recently was around GDPR data, where a customer wanted to remove GDPR I'm struggling here, GDPR data from a number of different sources. So there were different database types and things like that. So actually, within Europe, of course, as you know, there's a right to remove if you don't want to be in any sort of database within the environment. So what the customer had to do manually, they had to go and they had to run or get somebody to run queries across, you know, billing database, a customer database, maybe some other support database, and there was and it's just an overhead, right? You've already got Rundeck, you've got a tool that can present, you know, these tasks that you can then hand off to other people, make it self-service, take that hassle away from you as a bunch of users. So, you know, they had, in this case, maybe four different sources, or maybe actually six, actually. I don't know if I've put them all on here, but some were SQL queries, some were API calls and things like that. So by the time we got to the end, who was the user that you need to remove? Run the job and run the actual run the actual job on the platform. And of course, letting you know at the end whether it was successful. And of course, because there's only one way to do it, the chances of somebody doing it wrong, they could probably remove the wrong user. Hey, there's some things you probably can't engineer out, right? You know, but if somebody said, I want to remove JustynRoberts@gmail.com, you know, what is simpler than just giving them that and hitting that button to run the job? So just think about that one. So as I also mentioned, most of the use cases we see are around self-service type operations scenarios, as well as replacing cron and those kind of things. But actually also maybe consider payload transformation, you know, consider what you might be able to do with webhooks within your organization. You know, any job can be triggered from a webhook post, something that's sitting there listening securely for a for a JSON payload that you can grab. You could transform that data and you could post it somewhere else. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting, you know, Rundeck is this complete piece of middleware, but for some of the simple tasks that we deal with, you know, the idea of being able to take data in, change it in some way, maybe add some logic around that, and then repost it out somewhere else is again something that I've seen Rundeck used for quite successfully. I mean, if I take a quick look here, for example, let me just get rid of this. I can time in meetings being recorded. Yeah, if I take a quick look in here, you know, a webhook's super simple to deal with. Okay, super simple to deal with. You know, you've got a couple in there, a couple of different handlers. You can run the job, or you could do the log job by default. There are others that you can download for open source, and you can pass either parse on the CLI here for different data out of that JSON payload, or you can take the whole payload itself, which I prefer to do, and do some parsing actually in the job itself. So using something like the JQ log filter to be able to find very specific pieces of data within that JSON payload. So if anybody's got any experience of it, feel free to share that. But I think using Rundeck as a tool to take an input, process it, do something with it, and then post it back out with the HTTP post is quite interesting, I think. So moving on. Any questions, please ask. Health checks, okay. Rundeck is not a monitoring tool, but we do see use cases where somebody needs to run scripts around an organization for things like health checks, checking the posture of a machine, checking the availability of things like maybe certificates or something like that. In fact, I can show you that. So, there are monitoring tools out there, right? And they are very specific. But generally, if somebody needs to run something, they've run it all the time. They maybe ran it with cron, for example. Health checks is another interesting use case you might want to think about. I think I've got in fact, I've got samples for all sorts of things here, but I've got one here for checking external SSL certificates. Real customer use case that I just basically added into here, but all this is a bash script, I think, in here. I've got a bash script in here just to show you quickly.
Yeah, that always surprises us, Justyn, those people that run jobs in the early morning while drinking coffee to see if something is still alive or available or what.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. Yeah, I mean, it happens. I mean, I was surprised that people do start of day checks, but it happens a lot in finance, I think, where they want to do a set of checks manually before they start trading, for example. We've seen this, right, Martin?
Or in regions where there were a lot of power outages, which makes a lot of systems unstable. So I got it too, but it was interesting.
Specific countries, I think, we did some South Africa, for example, right? But I mean, these start of day checks seem to be quite a regular kind of thing where you go in and you say, is the machine available? Can I? Yeah, and these are, some of these are fairly, fairly simple checks, right? So the idea is, hey, why don't we wrap it up into a piece of automation, and we don't just have to run it at the start of the day. We could continually run it. Okay, so I've got here, for example, just a set of URLs. Okay, which I use almost as a UI here, because this is where a good place to store it. That means I don't have to go to my to sets of text. If I want to do that, I could upload text if I want to. I've got that in there, and then a small check for each website that I've done in Bash. Okay, and when I run that, as you'd expect, this does work on on any of the open source platforms. So I'm showing it here on actually on our cloud, but it works exactly the same way. So if I run that job, you'll see. What it does each time, it will actually say, okay, well, here's my website list. These are the one I'm going to check against, and then you'll start to see me coming back and getting data for each of those external websites. Hey, really simple use case, and I know you could go off and buy a tool specifically for that, but hey, you've already got an automation platform, quite capable of orchestrating your your daily scripts and the things that you do. Okay, a couple of other things. Moving on swiftly. Reuse. I've come from a sort of a developer DevOps kind of background also, so I'm a big fan of doing something once and not having to do it again. I think we were in a meeting, Martin and I, where somebody said, to be really into automation, You've got to be lazy, and that's me. I've got my hand in the air, right? If I've got to do something more than once, it's probably worth automating, depending how it goes. But that's kind of my approach to, and the successful user approach to how they work with jobs for the first time, because of course, Rundeck can be a bit intimidating, or at least, a bit empty at the beginning when you first start, right? I know a lot of people grow organically, but it can be quite empty. There's not much in there. You might have a few jobs that you run, and they run solidly and everything's great, but so I'm a big advocate for the idea of actually building your own internal catalogue of jobs. And if I took a look at mine, for example, so actually, because of the work that I do with customers, a lot of it's around sort of remediation and diagnostics and those kind of things. So here's my gallery of jobs that I've got for remediation, so for fixing things. And all I'd need to do, of course, is then at that point to be able to copy them down to another environment if I wanted to, or something like that. So again, I can duplicate to another environment. I might also, if I've got a set of standard jobs, and I think there's a difference, right? Sorry, my cat hassling me. If I've got something that I want everybody to have, then I'd do that through SCM, okay? Because it's always going to be there. It's going to be there, and it's going to be synced, and it's going to be in time. If I've got some things that I might want to send out as samples to the rest of my team to say, look, I've figured out how to, how to solve the problem of remediating orphan volumes, consuming disk space in Docker, rather than, this might not be something that I want to sync every time. So, again, if I copy it somewhere else, I break the connection with the parent, but in essence, it's my starter. This is where I start from. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Martin, but this is kind of where we see a lot of successful use of Rundeck is when people are starting to build up their own internal job libraries, for want of a better word.
Yeah, what I've noticed in the beginning that people wanted to have a separate environment for test and development and versus production. And yes, that's still something we sort of support if you need to test a new software version. But if it's purely around testing jobs, then definitely having a project for that and then able to copy out of those into your own project is way more efficient than exporting a job out of one environment towards another environment. You can, and we probably can also automate that, but that's a bit of a hassle. But if you do it like this, it's easy. Yeah, fully support the structure.
And actually, I've got a bit of a structure in one of my demo servers here, right? But just to give you an idea for some of that, look, I've got a job catalog here. I've actually got also some other catalogs there for some diagnostics, but again, I can hop into my job catalog at any point. Pick the things that are the most, sort of. I don't know if I've got actually that much in here. Yeah, okay, there we go. Execute a sumo logic safe query, for example. I can hit the actions, and I can then just duplicate that to my project that I want. So it's just an idea, but definitely think about that. A couple of other things I'm going to just go through quickly because I'm conscious of the time, and I know we can talk a lot. Developer portals. We are seeing still, for organizations that have some level of platform engineering as a skill, as a practice, again, you can build portals, or at least interfaces where you can interact with, spin up environments with, less risk, and all the other good reasons for doing that. The idea of, platform engineering has very much been to take some of the cognitive load away from developers. So the idea of building up some sort of portal means that they can, I need this, and this. Hey, hit the machine size. I can pick a cloud and just run with that. And of course, underneath the covers, we could be executing things like AWS CLI or G Cloud commands or Azure CLI to make this happen. Again, I'm interested, maybe just as a show of hands, if anybody is willing to, how many of you are using this for Ansible? It was definitely it was definitely a place that a lot of the users that we work with come from, where the requirement to deploy Ansible scripts in a more controlled fashion, to have a GUI for that, to be able to have that into some level of control. So think of it really as a front end for Ansible commands, but also to have that framework for logging, that framework for adding those guardrails around Ansible. And the good thing is that it's not tied to Ansible, so if you've got some Ansible in there, but you also want to run some Bash and some Python and some, some other applications that you run, that's the other part. Maybe a couple more things I want to talk about. Building plugins is easy. So if you've got some tasks that you're doing day after day after day, you could pop them in a reusable job, but equally you could build a plugin for this. We have examples on the site. There is a developer portion of the site, and also Bootstrap tools to actually make those a little easier for you. So my request is, if you've got some environment that you have to interact with, or you've got something that you actually think might be useful for the community, you can always fire off a pull request in the in the Rundeck environment for something. I mean, I build. I mean, my skills are not really around Java, but I've done some stuff in Groovy and Python, and then you get that as part then of the environment. So whether it's a plugin for notifications, a plugin for log storage, or just a job step, which generally, we see many more around job steps than probably the other things. They are a really straightforward way of getting from, here's my piece of code that I use again, to actually, to building a plugin for that.
And Justyn, I think during the periods we spoke to people using it, many made plugins themselves, but I've also noticed that not a lot of people post them to share with the world. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, somebody might make a plugin because it's interacting with their internal services. So firstly, you've probably got a security thing that you'd want to interact with our internal services. But secondly, I think people might not realize how interesting it is to share that out, right? Because again, when you've got 2 people or 10 people working on something, the iterations of functionality start to go quicker and quicker and quicker. But I think mostly, with the users that I've talked to, it's like, well, we've built it and it interacts with some of our, mainframe APIs, whatever, and we do not see either any reason that anybody in the world would ever need this themselves. But I would love to see more plugins being built and shared, and and kind of up level the rest of the open source community by getting it out there and building on top of it.
Yeah, and we had the situation that I think it was a car manufacturer that made a plugin, and we all found it super useful. And then we decided as a company to take ownership of that, maintain it ourselves, and now that everybody else could use it. So
yeah. So definitely we do adoption when it makes sense, or it becomes kind of that critical mass for everybody else. So anyway, have a think about that. I've got actually 2 more points that I want to have. So I've already overrun. I could have probably done an hour, but I do want to talk about this. And this is not strictly connected with open source, okay? And I want to talk about a while ago. One of my old CEOs was talking actually about moving to the cloud, and he put it in a way that really made me smile at the time. He says, "I've got the answer to what we need is DOS," and I'm like, "DOS? What is this guy on?"
Denial of service.
No, or DOS the operating system. I'm like, oh, hey,
Oh
what's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he was like, no, it's don't own stuff, right? So for all the reasons that we work with Amazon and everything else, right, we want to think about what is the actual cost of us of actually running this. So this is not strictly OSS, but I do want to mention, when you're running your own service, you run it, you plan your maintenance, you upgrade it, you have to scale it if you need to, you support it, but it's free. Okay, that's cool, right? And that's how it works. But there's definitely a cost of running that. Okay, we can also run that for you. We can run it, we can plan the maintenance, we can upgrade it, we can scale it, and we can support you. And I've lost a little bit of text on there, but I actually say, you can spend your time building more automation jobs, more innovation, and not running the platform. So I need to mention that because again, a lot of the time that I talk to customers, they're also saying to me, hey, we know that this definitely has a cost to us, even if even if we're just sort of just running that. So if you ever want to talk about that, I'm more than happy to dig in a little more. The interesting point about running cloud is quite often I get asked, well, we've got a lot of resource that sits on-prem. It's some hybrid environment. Maybe I've got some cloud services, but I've also got some on-prem. So just sort of almost as a follow-on from the conversation about, Rundeck in the cloud, we provide, is just to help you understand that there is a solution around running either in running tasks in self-hosted environments, or even different network segments or different customers or different data segments. And this is what we call the process runner. So small component runs on site nearer your resources. Think of it a bit like a Bastion box, but it's also got a set of inbuilt plugins. We're going to be adding the ability for you to build your own plugins on there as well. Connects outbound to the automation server, to Runbook Automation, to Rundeck in the cloud, picks up its jobs and then runs actually locally. So don't need any inbound firewall ports, and it's great for when you're running this across different network segments. It will do its local work, SSH, API calls, WinRM, all within your environment. Just worth maybe considering, because again, this is something that I talk to customers quite a bit about who just have a lot of value from Rundeck, but not necessarily want to be continually running or upgrading or looking for CVEs or all the other things that come with it.
And Justyn, I'll go back. So what we also did here for multiple open source users, that they installed open source multiple times in their own environment to sort of cover the segmentation and the ability to run automation in another segment. So yeah,
and that's just adding to that problem of cost, right? If you've got to maintain 10 Rundeck instances, it might be okay, but 10 databases or actually, while we're on the subject of databases, please tell me nobody's using a H2 database. You see it from us, we have it in big letters. H2 is the default database that comes out when you install Rundeck. It's not suitable for any sort of thing that you'd rely on. And I mean this in a nice way. I mean, it works and it's great for development, but soon as you start to think about anything that's production or you really don't want to lose. And I say that from a position of knowledge that H2 database is a file-based database, and it's really hard to restore. Until you've actually tried to get some data back out of that because you've lost it or you've got some file corruption. You don't know the word pain, right? So I just mentioned that in passing because again, that if you're using H2, go get yourself MySQL, go get yourself Postgres, install it on RDS, however you do it, but get to a proper database as soon as you can. I want to actually also maybe give something. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick demo. So this is something. Oops. So this is a quick demo. It's available if you want to download it. I don't know how useful it is, but I've been looking at a problem that I see with customers about, you know, just generally building jobs and their approach to them. Okay, and I've done a few blog posts around Gen AI and stuff like this also. So I'm quite a fan of, you know, sort of any of the sort of the, you know, the recent sort of stuff around, you know, large language models, and everybody's into it. So I'm not really going to talk about that too much. But what I did build, partly as a bit of a lab project or as a bit of a, you know, kind of a Saturday afternoon project while I've got my feet up in front of the TV, was this idea that, and I've talked to customers about it, is that, you know, things like documenting jobs is a pain, right? You know, it just takes time. You go and write your markdown after everything. So quite often, when I come to look at an environment, it's got a little bit of text, but the real knowledge about how the job runs, you have to go into the job and look at it and try and figure it out and all those kind of things. And it's like, well, firstly, it's a pain to do, but secondly, it's a bit of risk. What happens if you're off or the person that knows this is not around? And I think so. Anyway, long story short, I built something that will take any job, look at the job, and actually come back with a meaningful documentation about how it's configured, and actually then write that back into the markdown of the job itself. So again, I'll show you very quickly as we go through on here. Let me hop onto here.
And team, I'm expecting some thumbs up. What Justyn is about to show you is pretty sexy. I mean, a lot of people that find it like, wow.
So I've got a job here, and we can talk about this at another time. It's a job for job governance. So this would go through my entire environment and look for bad practices like using HTTP instead of HTTPS, using tasks with the word password in there and things like that. So that's there, and you can see I've got no document, no information about it whatsoever, and I'd have to go in and figure out what it does. But I'm going to copy the name of the job. I'm going to go back to my jobs, and then I'm going to run this Gen AI documentation assistant. So it needs the only thing it really needs is a key for something like OpenAI, quite easily modified for Amazon Bedrock. It could be modified for Azure quite easily. In fact, I had a customer this morning who actually downloaded this and said, okay, yeah, we're going to convert this to Azure, or your own local LLM. I mean, it'd probably work on OpenLlama. I'm not really tried. So I've got some settings here. Really, the only thing that I need to put in there is my UUID of the job. Okay, there are some other settings down here as well, because again, Confluence seems to come up again and again for, well, can we just document all of these jobs in Confluence? So the ability to document in Confluence is also there, but I'm not going to show that today. You get the idea. So I run that job against that environment, and you can see I can set the model. I'm using GPT-4.0 on here. I've got no Confluence token, so that ran really quickly. If I go back now to my job, okay, I should be able to see in job governance, at least it's given me some first information, which options can be used and what are the default values, what prerequisites. It needs Python, access to a Rundeck server, Rundeck API key with necessary permissions. I've got a disclaimer in there. It does mean that, you know, the prompt's in there. You can have a look at it. You can download it. You can modify it. You know, the prompt's in there. So you can change this if you want to have your own disclaimer, you want to have your own logos on there or anything else. But it does mean that you can go through all of your Rundeck jobs and have it understand, at least to some level, what each of the jobs are actually doing. It's probably not clever enough to go hunting down through lots of reference jobs and things like that, but the feedback I've had is quite positive. It's quite a simple script, but it is available for download there from my repo. So it's github.com/Justyn Roberts, and I think I've called it OpenAI documentation.